Okay, this video lesson focuses on change and continuity over time, but it also focuses on a couple of other important aspects of writing, like the principles of composition, words and expressions that are commonly misused, writing with an approach to a historical style, writing sentences in history, which, believe it or not, are actually different. And at the end, there is a formula that you could use for your change and continuity over time essay. Okay, first, the principles of composition. It is very important that you use an active voice, especially when writing about history. The active voice is definitely more direct, it's more robust. The reader will get a sense of description from an active verb as opposed to several different adjectives. So use your verbs in an active voice to describe the scene. And I've provided 2 examples. Return all samples to me, that's active, that's very clear. All samples are to be returned to me, well, that's passive. Okay, the latter sentence is less direct, bold, and less concise. And if the writer were to make it more concise by omitting certain words, albeit maintaining the same order of the words, it could become indefinite. And this doesn't mean that you have to discard the impassive voice entirely, because sometimes it is necessary, and I've provided another example. We will have dinner in the formal dining room. That is obviously a case where the passive voice is necessary. So please keep in mind to use the active voice and not the passive voice. Try and eliminate the linking or helping verbs as much as possible. Okay, definite, specific, and concrete language. We've talked about this several times in class with many of your advanced sheets and some of your other essays. It is very important to use the specific as opposed to the general, the definite as opposed to the vague, and the concrete as opposed to the abstract. It is much easier to follow an essay with definite, specific, and concrete language. And the words are more powerful. So, like this example, a period of unfavorable weather set in. It's not necessarily bad grammar, but it's definitely bad style. It rained every day for a week. That is definite, it is specific, and it's concrete. You know how long the unfavorable weather set in, you know what kind of unfavorable weather it was. So it's definitely a more powerful statement, even though to some of you it may seem more elementary or not as advanced language. He showed satisfaction as he took possession of his well-earned reward. Again, it's not bad grammar, but it's definitely bad style. He grinned as he pocketed the coin. Well, we know what his satisfaction was. We know how he showed that satisfaction. We know what he did with his reward. And we know what the reward was. It's definite, it's specific, and it's concrete. That is definitely a more powerful statement than the first one that's bad style. So please keep in mind that to arouse and hold the reader's attention is by being specific, definite, and concrete. Don't leave that AP reader attempting to decipher what you've written. Okay, that is very important. All right, principles of composition. Still focusing on this here. Omit needless words. I've seen this way too many in your advanced sheets. These are words that you don't need. It's just like, a sentence should not contain any unnecessary words. A paragraph should contain no unnecessary sentences. Just like a machine has no need for unnecessary parts. Okay, that doesn't mean that all sentences should be short or avoid detail. Obviously, you want to keep that specific and important information as part of your syntax or your sentence structure, but let every word tell. Every word that you write needs to serve a purpose. So these are some really good examples. The question as to whether. Just say whether. Whether or not, fill in the blank. There is no doubt but that. Those are a bunch of needless words. Just say no doubt. Used for fuel purposes. Just say used for fuel. He is a man who. That happens way too often in writing. Just say he. You don't need the other words. This is a subject that. Just simply write this subject. But I believe probably the most common word phrase that you guys write is the fact that. That's a rather undermining expression. Do not use this phrase. Okay, owing to the fact that, in spite of the fact that, call your attention to the fact that. Completely eliminate that from your writing, from your speech, and your words will be much more powerful. You could use better words that mean the same thing. Owing to the fact that. Just simply say since or because, in spite of the fact that. Just say though, or although, or however. That indicates some type of opposition, or instead of this, okay? Call your attention to the fact that. Well, instead of saying all of that, it's better to say, let me remind you, or this is to notify you, and fill in the blank. A lot of, well, I don't know about a lot, but some teachers and even in college, some professors might give you an assignment, a writing assignment, that requires a certain number of words, and I think that's really not a good idea because that's where students can come up with a lot of these needless words. When you write, every single word needs to serve a purpose, and if those words don't have a purpose, then they don't need to be part of your essay or your assignment. Every word needs to tell. Okay? So definitely don't ever use the fact that. Okay, completely eliminate that from your speech and your writing. Okay, keep related words together. This is also very important. The position of those words in a sentence is the principal or basic essential means of showing their relationship. He noticed in the center in the rug a large stain. Well, it definitely is bad style. He noticed a large stain in the center of the rug. I think that one is pretty self-explanatory. It's a very good example, but believe it or not, it happens way too often with separating words that should be together. Obviously, noticing the large stain, those go together. Okay, the subject of a sentence and the principal verb should not be separated by a phrase that can be transferred to the beginning. Toni Morrison, in Beloved, writes about characters who have escaped from slavery. Okay, again, the subject and the verb should not be separated. In Beloved, Toni Morrison writes, that's your subject and your verb, about characters who have escaped from slavery. Those should be together. Okay, place the emphatic words of a sentence at the end. Now, there, of course, are times when the emphasis needs to be placed at the beginning. However, usually it makes a stronger statement if the emphatic words are at the end. This steel is principally used for making razors because of its hardness. Well, because of its hardness is not the emphasis. The emphasis here is what the steel is used for, and that's making razors. Okay, that's the emphasis. So that needs to be at the end of the sentence. Because of its hardness, this steel is used principally for making razors. That's a much stronger statement, and of course it's better style. So, emphatic words, put them at the end. Now, you could put emphasis or emphatic words at the beginning, but any element in the sentence other than the subject becomes an emphatic word when placed first. And there are times when that is acceptable. Like this one, for example. Deceit or treachery she could never forgive. Well, obviously, deceit and treachery are the two things that she could not forgive. And it's, like I said, a stronger and better style to place the words in this manner as opposed to she could never forgive deceit or treachery. Well, when it's said that way, it almost sounds like deceit or treachery are people. Okay, so deceit or treachery, which we know are not people, she could never forgive. That is better style. Okay, otherwise it doesn't sound right. So it is possible for emphatic words to be at the beginning or at the end. Obviously, it depends on the syntax or the sentence structure that you've chosen in some cases, as well as the diction. So keep that in mind. Okay, words and expressions commonly misused. Many, like I've said throughout this entire lesson, they're not so much bad English or bad grammar, they're just bad style. And that leads to careless writing. Okay, and the correction, it's not necessarily the replacement of one word or set of words by another, but the replacement of vague generality by a definite statement. Remember, you want to be specific, definite, and concrete. Avoid being vague or general or abstract. Of course, this is not the final law on words and writing. The shape of our language it's not rigid. There are many ways to say one thing, just as there are many ways to interpret one statement. So if you're interested in more on this, or you want to pique that curiosity, hopefully you do have a little bit of curiosity about better writing styles, then please ask me. Okay, historical style. Place yourself in the background. Write in a way that comes naturally. Obviously, if you write in a way that doesn't come naturally, the reader's not going to read it naturally. And you want to work from a suitable design. Your formula, how you design your essay, it needs to flow, it needs to work. That can lead to a powerful message. And that is strong writing. That's good style. Again, write with nouns and verbs. In history, write with nouns and verbs. It's not so much about the adjectives in that description. The statement, therefore the paragraph, therefore the essay, therefore the thought and the theme and the message that you're trying to get across is more powerful. Write with those nouns and verbs. You can be very descriptive with verbs. Okay, definitely revise and rewrite. Don't assume that it's perfect the first time out. Don't overwrite. Avoid the use of qualifiers. Please eliminate very, extremely, rather, or quite. Those qualifiers are not needed in historical writing. I understand that sometimes qualifiers are needed in speech because you're trying to use an emphasis on something. However, when you're writing, especially historical writing, eliminate them. You don't need those qualifiers. Do not affect a breezy manner. Don't just bebop around with the way that you write. Breezy manner leads to generalities, vagueness, being abstract. And of course, you definitely want to avoid those. Orthodox spelling. That's important. And don't explain too much. You can explain something or an idea very well, and you can do it in one sentence. And that sentence doesn't have to be 40 words long. Okay? Again, that doesn't mean that it needs to be short or avoid the detail, but it doesn't have to be, really long either. Okay. Do not construct awkward adverbs. Remember, adverbs describe how, when, where, and they're used to describe adjectives or even other adverbs. Okay, but try not to construct awkward adverbs. It leads to the message probably being misinterpreted. Make sure the reader knows who is speaking. Avoid fancy words. Now, that doesn't mean use an extended avoid an extended vocabulary, but avoid fancy words that could be better said in another, with other words. Remember, it's not just syntax, it's not just your sentence structure, but it's also diction. Okay, your word choice. Let's see. Do not use dialect unless it fits the reader and the ear is good. Usually with historical writing, you want to try and avoid dialect really as much as possible. especially if it's a formal writing, like an essay or a paper. There's no guarantee that the reader is going to understand the dialect or slang, things like that. So avoid dialect. And be clear. Do not inject opinion. When you write historically, do not write I think, I feel, I believe. Eliminate that from historical writing. I understand there are some cases where you need to, the question asks, do you think, this and this and this, whatever it is. In that case, what you think is a necessary part of the answer. But when you are writing an essay, especially the AP exam, your DBQ essay, your compare essay, or your changing continuity over time essay, none of those prompts are going to ask what you think, what you feel, or what you believe about something. Eliminate it. Do not write your opinion. Use figures of speech sparingly. Do not take shortcuts at the cost of clarity. Now again, remember that's what I said. They don't have to necessarily be short or avoid detail, especially if the message is no longer clear. Avoid foreign languages. That's a no-brainer. And prefer the standard to the offbeat. When some people use fancy words or dialect, a breezy manner, now you're starting to get to the offbeat as opposed to the standard. And that doesn't necessarily mean that your message is simple. You want your words to be strong and powerful. But that doesn't mean that you should take the offbeat route to get there. Okay. Verbs, very, very important. They need to be precise. Try and stick to the past tense. You are writing about history, and most of these things have happened in the past. Put ideas in an intelligible order. Specifically for this change in continuity over time essay, we'll look at the formula at the end, and that intelligible order is very important. That's really the case for all of your essays that you ever write. But avoid pretentious language. Pretentious is an assumption of exaggerated dignity or importance. Most people don't speak that way, don't write that way. Avoid colloquial language. Colloquial, that's conversational speech, that's informal. Obviously in speech, that's fine. To your peers, that's fine. But informal writing, essays, papers, even if it's an in-class writing assignment, don't write in colloquialisms. Don't write in conversational speech. Okay, be sensitive to the politics of diction. Diction is word choice. You need to be sensitive to that. Pay attention to your word choice. And this goes back to the pretentious language, the colloquial language, a breezy manner, offbeat. Okay, all of those fall under diction. Avoid euphemisms. Euphemisms are the substitution of a vague expression for thought to be offensive or harsh. Avoid those. Choose figurative language carefully. Right, this of course is figure of speech. If at all possible, completely avoid it. Use metaphors and similes judiciously. That means exercise good judgment. It's not always a better route to use a metaphor or a simile when you're trying to describe something. Remember, when you're writing in history, use your nouns and your verbs. And of course, avoid cliches. Those are overused expressions. All right, analysis. Okay, continuity and change over time essay. The analysis of continuities and changes over time, this is the focus on what stayed the same, what changed. Your thesis statement should address both continuity and change. And you can't just simply state there were many continuities and many changes. You have to specifically state what those are. There we go back to that word, specific. This essay covers at least one of the defining periods of world history, and that's given to you in your prompt. I keep the evidence and the analysis relevant to that time period. Possible themes that could be part of the prompt: technology, trade, culture, migrations, environment, religion, government systems, laws, communication. Usually just one of those is the focus of the essay, but it's subject to many different themes. So you need to be very familiar with the information and the content. Construct an argument that responds directly to the prompt. So use argumentation, causation, contextualization, and synthesis. Remember, synthesis is putting everything together as a whole. And, when you're analyzing, you're examining each part individually. But by analyzing, what you should be able to do with your analysis is you should be able to write at your analysis, your reasoning, with your evidence, and you should be able to come up with a central thought, a central theme, a central idea. That's your synthesis. Putting those bodies together. Obviously, stay within the specified region. Usually it'll give you a choice between 2 or 3 different regions. Stay within that region. If you decide to write about the culture or trade in Latin America, and you've been given a choice between Latin America, Europe, and Africa, don't start writing about Europe. Okay, stay within your region. And the continuity and change over time essay needs to go beyond the beginning, the middle, and the end. And a lot of kids fall into this trap because it's an essay about time. You want to actually provide a solid chronological evidence. Okay? And in order to do that, include dates or date ranges. If you're not exactly sure of the exact date, but it was in the 1850s, then go ahead and write 1850s. That's definitely better than eliminating the date altogether. Or even if you say early 1900s, if you're not exactly sure that World War I began in 1914, and you're too scared to say in the first decade of the 20th century, then just say the early 1900s. And you want to describe, when you write your date ranges, you need to describe this with some type of precision for when those changes in continuities occurred. Okay, your historical analysis explains the reason for or the impact of a specific continuity or particular change. And you want to provide specific causes or specific impacts. We've talked about this before: world historical context, extra-regional connection, or global process. That's what historical context is. You're taking that thesis, okay, your answer, and you're giving it, you're connecting it to another part of the world. Okay, you're putting that into a global process. What happened in world history. So this is a big focus on global links as opposed to just a similar situation in another part of the world. So I've provided an example, and I think this is a really good example. And notice that they're not real big, wordy, fancy words. These are very descriptive, very concrete. They're not vague. Okay. China and Brazil both had Jesuit missionaries. Well, that's a comparison. That's not a connection. Okay. European Jesuit missionaries were proselytizing in South America and winning converts. This happened in China as well. That's an argument that draws on extra-regional connection. Okay, that goes beyond a simple comparison. And here is the evidence that can, explain a change, but then I've given you an example of evidence that also gives super duper awesome analysis. Nationalism grew in Africa in the 20th century. Well, that's a solid piece of evidence about change. That is direct, it's to the point, it's specific, it works. But if you were to say nationalism grew in Africa in the 20th century, which led to the overthrow of European empires, that's solid evidence that gives super analysis, because now you've given a reason as to, or not a reason, but the impact of what nationalism had for those European countries, and that was being overthrown. So hopefully you notice the difference there. Okay, and here we've come to the end the continuity and change over time formula. We've gone over this before. I know you guys are familiar with it, but stick to this formula. You can't go wrong. Okay, first you need an introduction. In your introduction, you restate the prompt, and of course you need to include the time period and the location. I'm going to tell you right now, if you restate the prompt verbatim, and then of course you pick the specific location out of the 2 or 3 that you get to choose from, that you're spot on. That's awesome. And of course, you have to have a specific thesis that addresses all parts of the question. So you need to include continuities and changes. You can't just include one or the other, and you can't just say there were more of one than the other. You have to say what exactly those continuities and changes are. In your advanced sheets, you guys are starting to get away from that, and you're telling me, oh, this had a large impact on the rest of the world, or this existed in many parts of the world. That's not a thesis. Okay, paragraph 2. Choose either your first continuity or your first change. It doesn't matter which one you write about first, but whichever one you choose, make sure you provide pieces of evidence, analysis, evidence, analysis, and context that fits that particular answer, that particular continuity or change. Next, in paragraph 3, this is your second continuity or change. Same thing. It also needs evidence, analysis, and context that fits with that answer. Paragraph 4, choose either your third continuity or third change. Pieces of evidence, analysis, and context needed for this one as well. If you want to get into the expanded score for your essay, which you should all want to do that because that's how you're going to get a 4 or a 5, then you definitely need to have a third continuity or change. If you can get 4 in, even better. And of course, you guys are familiar with the conclusion. That's only if time permits. You don't get any points for the conclusion, so if you forget about it or you don't get to it, that's okay. You definitely want to have everything else. The thesis, your answers, your evidence, your analysis, and the context. If you can provide a world historical context for more than one answer, you're looking at expanded score. So if you can, get it all in there. Okay, thank you guys. I hope that this video lesson was helpful. If you have any questions about anything, please ask me. I'm here to help. Excuse me. If you want to come in after school and just work on some things and some writing, please come in. I'll do what I can to get you guys ready for that AP exam. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it, and you guys have a good day.